All right. Hello, everybody who is not here yet. Here we go. Just made sure I had everything up and running. And so now let's reset all the stuff in the control room. And I'll drink some water and then I'll get started on everything. Should be somewhat back to normal now, to some extent at least. Do I want to deal with Google Earth potentially being Google Earth? Sure, let's give it a fresh chance. If not, we're gonna go back to the bathymetric site for our world map navigation. All right, not lagging us out yet. Let me drink some water. Then we'll see who shows up. And then I don't know. This probably be between half an hour and an hour. Uh, two. That's kind of enough, I guess. Hmm. Sorry, I had to yawn for a second. Okay, so Uh, Middle East wise, for the time being, not much really going on, at least in intensity. Israel and the remnants of Hamas are still fighting daily in Gaza, but the 2 years of carpet bombing is basically over at this point. We did make it all the way through November, and Israel has not yet initiated their next round of air campaign against Iran. That some uh, they somewhat leaked back in summer that it was supposedly going to be in November, but either that leak was false or that was intentionally a misdirection. And then they announced in September publicly that it was going to be within the last 3 months of the year, so October last month or this month, if the situation with Iran didn't improve. And there were no specifications given as to what exactly that even meant. So it was just kind of a self written blank check to do whatever. So theoretically, to stay within that, they would have to do it sometime or at least start sometime during this month, unless that itself was a partial misdirect and they're gonna like start literally on January 1st or something as kind of a psych gotcha moment. But we'll have to wait and see. We coming in? Now we're coming in. Hello, everyone who's just showing up. You can scroll back through the first few minutes. You can skip the first 1 or 2 minutes, though, but you can scroll back if you missed like the 90 seconds of Iran related stuff. There's going to be more because there's other Iran related stuff of a different nature later, but not at the moment. All right, so Venezuela, which we all know is coming, has not begun yet, but supposedly the U.S. administration said at the start of this week that it was making its final decision within the coming days, which would mean probably sometime during this week or the weekend. So, could interpret that as about to start everything within the next coming days, or that they're just going to pick a date that will be yet further weeks out into the future. But supposedly, in the process of making a final decision, even though that decision was kind of already made, everybody knew this was coming anyways. But we are at the point of, hold up, we are at the point of 12, 12 warships in the general Caribbean off of Venezuela. 10 are Liebherr destroyers, 2 Ticonderoga missile cruisers, plus 1 supercarrier, the Gerald Ford, which would mean 80 to 90 combat jets, mixture of F-18s and F-35s. 1 smaller regular carrier, which would mean about 30, most of those in the case of that particular small carrier being Harriers and Viper attack helicopters. And then the associated other vessels like those carrying marine amphibious landing units. And then there's also up here on Puerto Rico, there's Reaper drones and F-35s. And across the southern Caribbean islands, stuff has been flown in and out on C-17s over the past few months. Unknown what, but almost certainly it's just anti-air systems that are being placed there in case Venezuela does attempt some kind of retaliation against U.S. naval assets or threatens some kind of retaliation against their neighboring islands themselves. But likely just kind of handing the governments of those islands like a couple briefcases full of cash to let us throw some SAM systems there for the time being. But like I said before, it's almost going to be entirely just a airstrike and cruise missile campaign to hit a number of things, primarily of the Venezuelan military and internal security, or ski mask black bagging association, enough to just push Maduro to eventually give it and I don't know, go retire to Cuba or to I don't know some penthouse in Dubai or whatever with all the oil money he has. As the the government structure of Venezuela is kind of already able and ready to accept a replacement system, and an entire opposition government already exists because Venezuela was always in a position where it kind of had to maintain that degree of an illusion of allowing opposition, uh, maintaining such to an extent to where the opposition government literally can just step right in and assume the reins because the system is not that cult leader drain swirling isolated the way it tends to be in other places, as Venezuela is a type B or type 2 totalitarian system, whereas type A is the like Nazi Germany or North Korea type, where literally everything revolves around the guy or the party if it's multiple people. So that is oncoming. And let's see, what else do we have set up here? Iran, the other Iran stuff I mentioned. So switch over to pink/red since that will be the most visible. So Iran has a very quickly approaching water supply problem, just like its neighbor Iraq does, just for different reasons, as a lot of the agriculture and other water needs in Iran have come to very quickly depend almost entirely upon groundwater extraction now, since lakes like Lake Urmia, you can see up there, have completely gone dry. There used to be multiple large lakes you could have seen in the past across Iran, but now, as you can see, some of like the other similar spots, they're all just dry salt beds. So those are gone. And now Iran has been relying on groundwater, which at the how do I draw it? I'm going to draw the old typical crank handle thing that a person would use, back in the 1700s, because that's the only way I can draw a water well. Otherwise, it would just look like I was drawing an oil well. So the for the various groundwater wells, on general average, uh, about a couple decades ago, at the start of the 21st century, they hit groundwater at about 25 meters. However, that went down by 10 or 20 over the course of like 15 years. And then over the last 10 years, from the mid 2010s up until now, the end of 2025, it has rapidly gone down to a point where the groundwater level is 150 meters below ground. And the quote unquote bottom out point for the different porous rock layers that contain these aquifers are different in, different regions of the country, obviously. But on general average, this is pretty close to most of them. And the majority of regions are apparently within 2 to 3 years of reaching that limit, which is that does not mean when you reach the bottom limit of an aquifer, that does not mean that that's it, you're just out of water forever, because the aquifer is water that collects in the ground as a result of rainwater seeping down. So if you're using up that water and the water level is going down, that obviously does, yes, mean you're using water way faster than it would otherwise recharge in there. So you will still have whatever rainwater falls in the country or the region to use, but you can no longer draw on excess water from the aquifer because that is gone. So it's not a case of instantaneously hitting zero and everyone dehydrates to death and all the crops instantly fail. It's more a case of you go from having 100% water availability down to 20, unless you've been slowly stepping down usage over time, with like gradually adding more and more restrictions as long as they're actually enforced onto your agriculture or onto the population, in which case it will be like going down from whatever percentage you've stepped down to, like, say, 50% availability, to suddenly dropping down to 20 in the blink of an eye. So massive agricultural, industrial, and social shock will come with that, but it's often misinterpreted as a abrupt zero, no water is coming out of anything anywhere situation. In reality, it will be, it looks more like a no water is coming out of any pipes or taps in random towns or regions here or there for a few weeks at a time while the system tries to uh, manage itself and reconstitute and like work out some management of making sure enough of this now greatly diminished amount of water gets distributed through the national pipeline system so that each general area that the government decides matters does get their allotted like 2 gallons per 5 people per day or whatever. But that is rapidly approaching, and Iraq is in a similar situation, except they don't rely on groundwater. They predominantly rely on the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. If they were relying on groundwater, it would be kind of bad because their groundwater would have been mixing in with petroleum. So whereas Iran's petroleum is like all in this one little area, so the rest of the country is fine. But Iraq is also in a similar situation, just for different reasons. But I made a specific video about that a little while ago, so that should be there if you want to go see that. Let's see. The photographers, blah blah blah. Uh, yes, the yeah, that's differing geology. That's why, for example, Saudi Arabia does have underground water, and Yemen did as well. It's all gone now. It's kind of empty, which is one of the many reasons Yemen is just kind of completely screwed. Oman still has some. The UAE does not. Iraq really uh, doesn't, and Egypt doesn't really have any either. But under different layers, this is the same. It's the same thing with why you do or don't find oil and gas in some regions, despite them having the appropriate topography for it. Like, for example, as I always say, you have the Persian Gulf area, which is this really low, shallow, partially closed off from the sea basin, which is one of the main types of areas where you will find oil and gas. But if you have that set up without having porous rock layers like carbonaceous stuff, or in the case of the Persian Gulf, miles and miles of like empty sandstone layers underneath it, because it's been a desert for quite some time. Whereas there's less in the basins in the Sahara, although there is oil and gas there, but the Sahara, as we now have learned, has constantly switched back and forth between being green and being a desert. So in its underlying rock layers, it has thinner layers of porous sandstone, and then on top of that there'll be other layers, and then on top of that, then there'll suddenly be another thin layer of sandstone. So that's part of not the whole reason, but that's part of why, despite being thought of as one big blob called the Middle East, there's a lot less overall oil and gas wise in North Africa and the Sahara than there is in the Arabian Peninsula area. But there's also uh, the same thing kind of applies to rock layers that hold groundwater, although that also involves some different rock layers, as a lot more of them are a lot more of them can hold water than there's more types that can allow for water than there are that can allow for oil and gas, at least to be in nice permeable underground reservoir collections, that is. So that's we're not lagging, are we? Okay, looks like we're fine. So that's the reason why almost every country on Earth has, or at least in the past, before emptying it, had some amount of aquifer or groundwater. But nowhere near every country on Earth has or had oil and gas reserves. Although plenty probably did, but over geological changes and the way things were like, Iran probably had a better amount of oil and gas in the past, but as kind of geologically smashed into neighboring land masses and stuff upfolded itself, it got sort of pressed out and then mixed into less desirable rock layers that left it no longer really extractable. So, I mean, all of its fields are like down here, right in the flat area at the coast, or underneath the seabed of the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia in terms of how much they have remaining in their groundwater aquifer, I do not know. That is something they keep a closely guarded secret, just like with what their real remaining amount of oil is. Although they made the mistake of, being honest in the past with how much oil they had up until the 1980s. So it is possible to do the math based on the previous numbers, then adding all of the any and all recent discoveries or mathematical adjustments to how much was originally in certain fields like Ahar. It is possible to just work out through math what their real current numbers are regarding oil. So that one they can't really escape that being figured out, but they can still just deny it whenever someone comes up with the right numbers. Like me, for example, not that they deny my numbers because I'm too small in my existence for their government to acknowledge that I'm real, but uh, how much water they have remaining, I have no idea because they never actually published that kind of data. Not even like domestically, it's not something that was ever of like any kind of interest. But uh, given the differences between them and Iran, Saudi Arabia probably does have a further like better amount of water remaining underground than eight. Are we back to normal? We're back to normal. Probably still going to run the aquifers dry in the reasonable future, which is, the reason why they built so many desalination plants, which themselves are just not something you want to rely on. That's not really going to end well, but it's the only thing they could come up with. So further going into the yes, the world can sustain a population at its current level. That is possible, but that would also depend on distribution of that population. So you can't have like 80 to 90 million people in, places that can't really handle 80 to 90 million people. But that part, or sorry, really should be circling this part. But that part's a bit out of our direct control in any way. All right, did we get anybody else? And are you guys synced? Huh. Iraq's blah 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 blah. Yeah, they're down. Iraq's down to 6 or 8% remaining in its dam reservoirs, and the moment those are done, then the only water is just going to be whatever falls in rain every year, which is obviously not really a lot, and whatever is coming down the rivers, the amount of which has been uh, constantly constrained. Turkey says it's only holding back what's necessary, but there probably is some degree of geopolitical planning going on to have have that open as like something they can offer, like offering to release more water down the river if Iraq agrees to sell them oil at like half the price or something. And up with Ukraine and Russia stuff. Let's see, what do we have? Ukraine has also begun striking Russia's oil tankers in the Black Sea, which, as with everything that happens to Russia, Russia denies either entirely or just denies that it's actually a problem. So, three regular tankers out of commission, one down here, which Russia tried a new line of saying that one didn't matter because it only looks like an oil tanker, but it was really carrying like it was really carrying like vegetable oil or I don't know, sunflowers or something, which I don't get the point of making these statements anymore, as no one believes this. Let's blah. Also strikes on one of their few oil and gas equipment manufacturing facilities, which so previously, let's zoom out further. So previously, Russia predominantly relied on Western oil and gas equipment. And then once they invaded Ukraine and they got cut off from that, at first they just went on what they had in like stockpiles, but that eventually started to run down. And they had third parties sort of smuggle or resell them stuff. But even the third parties kind of stopped doing that, both to avoid sanctions consequences and also because they kind of wanted to actually get something out of it. Like they started using that as leverage to like ask for lower oil prices and stuff. And Russia could only start offering so low. So they then have, after that, been mostly having to rely on Chinese stuff, which has been of lower quality than the stuff they were used to working with. And they got up to a point where now they were able to start relicensing or making some of that stuff domestically. And one of those factories was around here, and the factory itself got struck, which kind of hampers the process of repairing all the oil refineries and everything. And also, despite being part of the OPEC plus family group, they kind of got a funny stab in the back from who we were just talking about, actually, Saudi Arabia. So the Russia has still been managing to sell oil, but in the past few months, it's come down to only really China now buying it. So that's even further cut their revenue off. And to make matters worse on their end, Saudi Arabia kind of did another backstab on top of ending the OPEC production cuts and increasing production, which kind of crashed oil prices. Saudi Arabia also just randomly offered China to, they're offering China a special price of $5 less than the market price if they switch over to predominantly buying Saudi oil instead of buying any from Russia. So Saudi Arabia has actually been on a kind of uh, an epic buddy backstabbing spree recently. And using that to swing over to China, things continue to down spiral in the Chinese real estate market. So you remember, just like everything else with China, everything was going up and up and up and up, and everyone was investing in and flocking to China because everyone was like, China's it's the next big thing. China's the next US. It's the big new superpower thing. And a few people, some with large voices and some like me with non-existent ones, started saying this. You really should pull out. This isn't going anywhere. Even if only looking at like individual factors, the whole population crash in China alone is going to do this in. But global factors are going to tie into this, plus things they intend to do soon that are not going to end well. But everyone kept going and going because sunk cost fallacy. And now on the regular business and manufacturing end, everything's been fleeing China into India and Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia. But also the Chinese real estate market has been gradually spiraling and rapidly picked up speed this year. So it was going up and started to plateau around COVID 2021, 2022 until it then lost about 10% over 2023, lost another 10% of value nationwide over 2024. And from there, from that value, it decreased down to 81% of the original. It now plunged by 36% this year. Uh, it differs by different aggregators, different, forgot what they're called. There's like a specific name for real estate companies or the massive like brokerage firms that own huge like sections of apartments and businesses in the country, like private equity firms or whatever. I don't know. The amount varies, but it averaged out to 36. So all in all, that's roughly 50% downturn since we've gone into the 2020s, which is primarily just people finally waking up. And that's an exclamation point. And realizing the obvious that this isn't going to keep going up and up. If, for one, the Chinese population has peaked and is decreasing and is going to decrease really fast as we go into the future, there's, you can keep building these ghost cities one after another, but no one's going to be there. They're not going to have value anymore if no one's going to buy them. And the only people who were buying them were, I'll draw some random ghost cities. The only people who were buying them were, ironically enough, predominantly American and American and like British investors and whatever finance bros who were just buying them to hold on to them until they, got bought out at higher prices. But now they're having to rapidly depart the market because they're realizing the obvious that population doing this doesn't result in real estate value doing this. The value continuing to increase up until just the last 3 years was artificial. There's not some like booming demand coming for it. The booming demand was you. It was you trying to get in on something that was never going to be there. And even if people previously wanted to make the argument that, well, there's not going to be people buying stuff, but there's going to be business coming in buying stuff, that's now turning on its head because, again, the businesses are fleeing elsewhere. India, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, because they see the way it's heading. They don't like the totalitarian super big daddy surveillance stuff that Beijing is doing, and they also know that the Taiwan invasion is coming soon, and that everything's going to blow back hard after that. So everyone's been vacating, and so now there's no argument left for it. So it's the real estate market is now heavy down spiraling, as it kind of should, which I mean will also be good for like the Chinese people themselves though, because as the value for real estate drops, then you get nice cheaper living. Unless you will think negatively of this if you're like a 65-year-old boomer who thinks of your house as a financial asset that you want to sell at some point so you can pretend to be rich and retire on a yacht in Miami or whatever. A house and or even an apartment, uh, which this will surprise my fellow Americans, but in other countries, people buy apartments. They also rent them, but people just like apartments in a lot of other countries also get sold uh, like houses. Like you can just buy an apartment in the same way you can buy a house. Uh, the U.S. and Canada are like the only places where apartments and small living spaces are like rent only. That's actually that's somewhat of a uniquely U.S. thing. But a house and or an apartment is supposed to be a living space. It's not some cringy sociopathic financial asset you sit on until it hoards up enough money for you, and then you sell it to you sell it to someone the age of your grandkids who you know will never be able to actually pay the mortgage off, but you don't care because you're going to go run away to some resort in Miami for the rest of your life until you get dementia in a few years and end up in a nursing home. But so for the regular Chinese person who wants to like buy a home or an apartment, this like any housing price come down, this will be a good thing, obviously, because then they'll be able to afford more stuff. As will in the future become the case for Japan, as Japan uh, kind of kind of like the U.S. Japan has is still has a lot of old boomers and private equity firms holding on to a lot of stuff. So massive like value of houses and or purchasable apartments has not like plunged yet. It is coming soon because even when you have that structure, there's only so long you can hold that illusion together. But remember, China even now is still a rising economy or a middle income economy. The the Chinese people have only been like in U.S. or Europe slash Australia slash Japan ish modernity for like the last 3 decades or so. So they don't have multiple generations going back of like home ownership type stuff. So they're they do obviously have a loaded amount of old people at the top because of how their demographic structure looks. But in their case, thankfully, it's not a giant chunk of like multiple house owning boomers that are never going to let go of stuff. Actually, over there in a lot of places that are not the US, Canada, or Australia, uh, a lot of places around the world still actually practice multi generational household living, like humanity did for all of its history, except in the US, Canada, and Australia for the last 70 years or so, where we came up with this weird system of you have kids and then they turn whatever the legal age to dump them off is, and then you immediately like just dump them out on the street and tell them to suck it up or whatever, and they never return except for being allowed to visit at Christmas. It was actually kind of normal for everywhere on Earth for all of human history outside the US, Canada, and Australia for the last 70 years that literally at least two, if not three generations of people all kind of just lived in the same continual house. And the only reason that it stayed at three is because you never really had four alive at the same time. The fourth one would die off, and because life expectancy was low back then, and the third one, even commonly, would also die off. But especially nowadays with the cost of living issues we are having all around the world because of quite a number of culminating issues that are not things you can vote away. Everyone, especially in the US, like US conservatives, are so blindingly convinced. That's I don't know. Trump is gonna bring back the '90s and the '80s or something. They're not coming back. I'm sorry. I would love the '90s, the late '90s and the early 2000s to come back. I would love those. I'd even take the 2010s back at this point because, the 2010s, I still live back up home in Alaska. Jesse, my first cat, was still alive back then too. And I lived on my own up there. I was able to get by on only $8,000 a year. And on the years that I made like ten or $12,000 a year, I was able to afford to take trips like to San Francisco and Baltimore each year. But those days are gone. And now I live with my parents, who unfortunately live in the lower continental US. So I live down here with them back in what was historically a much more normal housing arrangement for all of human history. But this is the reason why you're seeing this kind of comeback. And or also like 5 to 6 friends living together in the same apartment or same house, as is the case with Nick, Kayla, Jordan, and I don't know who their other friends' names are that live with them in their place back up home, but they all live in one place. And let's see. That looks like that is pretty much everything. I went on an off tangent there, sort of talking sideways. And let's see. What were we on for? 42 minutes. Let's see. Left off here. Dump the water into the ocean. I don't. Okay, these don't. Are they timed? Okay, they're not even time stamped on YouTube. So sorry, I don't. If I wasn't paying, when I'm not paying attention to chat actively, I can't keep track of when something was done. Uh, China and critical minerals. The only thing China is still the primary supplier of is uh mostly vanadium and tungsten, coming from the Liaoning area there, along with that's also where they mine a lot of other stuff for their domestic supply, which and also up here in the Dakin area north of them is where a lot of their oil was originally, back in the earlier times, which those two things combined is the actual reason that Japan invaded the Manchuria area. It wasn't just because it's close by or they wanted something. When they started their imperial conquest across Asia, the reason they started by invading Manchuria was because the Manchuria basin had a concentration of literally everything and still does. It's just most of the oil and gas is gone now. Most of it's been sucked out of the ground. But at the time, back in the 30s, it had oil, gas, and now it still does have iron, titanium, vanadium, tungsten, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the only reason they're still that dominant in tungsten and vanadium is because everyone else is being stupid. Like there's vanadium and tungsten elsewhere. Just no one up until now up until China kind of revealed that, yeah, it does want to make like geopolitical power plays and like do all this other vassal state stuff. Everyone kind of thought for a while idiotically that China was like just a big money making like business machine that was also a country, and that like financial stuff was the only thing China was interested in. But it is turning out, like prime example here, obviously, no, China is also a country that wants to do like geopolitical power play stuff. So only now has everyone started finally looking elsewhere for supplies of things. China, let's see, the rare earths are here in the southern clays or the ion clays, and up here in the black sand underneath Inner Mongolia. China still mines and exports more rare earth metals than anybody else. However, while that was 90% of the global supply 7 years ago, it is now down to only between 50 and 60%, as other people have come on the scene, especially Australia, as there is quite a lot in the middle of Australia, just like there's a lot of every mineral in Australia. And also Namibia will be coming online soon as well. And the US, started actually mining rare earths in California again. We did in the past. They just stopped in the early 2000s and up through the 2010s. And what was I? Oh yeah, I was jumping off of stuff from chat. Let's see. Yes, they still do the most processing, but not for long. That is also shifting elsewhere. That for the rare earth processing, that stuff is complex. That those plants and that machinery, so that's taking a little bit. Uh, other stuff, other stuff like say copper smelting and refining, that's pretty easy, and there's not a lot of like rapidly building a whole bunch of new copper capacity elsewhere, primarily because we in the US, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere, we have a lot of it's called idled when it's not being used. And actually, even in Peru, Mexico, and Chile, there's a lot that's not being used. We have actually enough for ourselves collectively to meet the global demand outside of China. Because remember, a huge chunk of the global demand for both raw materials and processed and refined materials is being consumed by China itself. It's not like China's over here consuming 1% while supplying the other 99% or something. Remember, China is consuming, depending on what product you talk about, between 10% and half of everything that's being made. As when you are a rapidly modernizing nation of like 1.4 billion, that tends to be what happens. If they were completely modernized already and done, like say their neighbors Japan and Korea are, if everything was already built up and in 2025 or roughly equivalent, they would not actually be consuming this much. But because China is still modernizing, where they're up to about like 800 million of their population live in the 2020s or rough equivalent, whereas there's still a couple 100 million people in China who live in much lower standard. They just don't talk about that part. Everyone talks about how China has brought 800 million people up out of poverty, which is awesome. But that still leaves like another 500 or 600 million people that have not come up out of poverty yet. So they're still working on like fully modernizing the entire population, which is why they're still consuming a lot of stuff, especially like copper to continue expanding their electric infrastructure. Even though most of the population in China has electricity, just like although to a lesser extent, most of the population of India, say on paper, has electricity, but that's using the UN quality of life definition, and I'm dead serious. The UN quality of life definition for as electricity is that is a person lives in a town, village, or whatever that has at least they specified like a number of light bulbs in the village or town or city, and the person is within walking distance of a phone charger. That is the UN definition of has electricity, which I mean, there's plenty of places in like Ethiopia where there's villages around like a larger town that's within like 1 hour's walking or biking distance, and in that town there's like a store that has a light, and there's a little dock in the store where you can charge your phone if you want to, and the UN uses that as a definition for as electricity. So what you think of when you think electricity access and what the definition is actually being used are two very different things. So uh, in China, like I said, for example, on paper, 100% of the population has electricity. In reality, it's closer to like 80, 90, with the other 10 or 20 having more access than Ethiopia, but still not really having like say modern amenities or anything. Like they're even within range of Beijing, even within range of the mega urban modern super capital, there, like just 3 years ago during one of the bad winters in 2020, I'll draw some smoke here. There, there were still rows and rows of houses in the outer stretches of the mega urban ring where like they don't even have like modern heating systems or electric furnaces. The people in that area like still have coal boilers that they shovel coal into. Now, because that getting publicized was humiliating to the Chinese government, draw a big frowny face, they rushed a super program over the last 3 years and basically like came in like the Kool-Aid man and kicked it down everybody's door and replaced their coal boilers with natural gas heaters and furnaces and HVAC systems and everything. So, humiliating your government publicly is, apparently the actual way to suddenly have things get done rapidly. That's the hint you should take from that. Let me drink some water. Oh, and starting to taste bad. Okay, that means the bottle is degrading. I'm starting to swallow the microplastics. Time to switch bottles soon. What the? Scroll down. Scroll down. What is this? What is it doing? Is it broken in here? It's not broken on this one. What is this? Do you guys see this? YouTube, explain yourself. What are you doing? What are you doing? All right. Well, that's the sign for me to stop, anyways. Thank you for everybody who showed up. That's going to be the end of this one, unless anything else comes up. Otherwise, I will see everybody around next time. But I'll wait like 15 seconds for the stream delay, just in case anyone did rush anything in at the last second. So I'll do a price check while I wait for that. Let's see. Did anything really move today? No, not really. Everything is in roughly the same place it was this morning and last night. All right. Now it looks like that's going to be everything. So thank you guys again.